Hello there and welcome back to The Closet Historian and back to my studio for a quick crafting project. Now those of you who have been here for a while might remember that I have a lot of foam craft pumpkins that I put out every year. Usually I do a Halloween lookbook each year and all these pumpkins appeared in that lookbook last year. You can see them here on set. I give them some very over the garden wall kind of silly little faces here that I thought were quite cute. But I have received a few questions on where I get my foam pumpkins as if they are different than the ones you get at your average Michael's or Joann's, which they are not. And you can see they are quite plasticky looking when you get them. There's no shading or any definition or color going on here. So I'm going to do a little bit of faux finishing, painting on this first, and then I will show you how I carve them with a hot knife tool. So it's pretty simple DIY today, but I thought since it was Halloween season, I'd just show you how I make my reusable pumpkins. And we begin with a bunch of pumpkins over on the blue patterning table of doom, which today will be the blue crafting table of doom, which as you can see there are paint stains from crafting projects past. So it's not a stranger to these things. So I have some cheap acrylic craft paint, some foam pumpkins, and then I have some sea sponges and a fake sea sponge as well. There, I kind of like these soft fake sea sponges that you can usually find in like the loofah area or like the body wash area for the shower, but they work well in a painting kit as well. I have a paper plate here to use as my palette today. I'm going to grab a couple of paintbrushes and also a toothbrush to use today as well. And then you can see I have some candles or battery operated candles here to pop in these once they're done. But I'm going to start with my orange pumpkins here. I'm going to leave these orange. If you want to paint them a different color, paint them like a good mid-tone of the finished color you want to begin with. But I'm going to begin with the standard orange that they come with, and I'm going to mix up a slightly rustier, darker orange here. This one is actually, I'm making these a little bit more contrasty today because I'm making mine for camera. You can see the one that's behind me on the right there. That one's not too contrasty, so the colors aren't that different, but just working in different shades of the same color here. You can of course use different colors for different effects, but I'm just going to grab this a little bit darker orange here on a watercolor paintbrush. This is a size 8, I think. I have two paintbrushes. Basically, I just want two round brushes, one that's a little bit larger than the other. So it doesn't have to be specific size. But I'm just going to fill in the lines of my pumpkin, like the indentations that come on this pumpkin. I'm going to run my brush down those lines. Does not have to be perfect. Nothing about painting these should be perfect, honestly, because if you want a more natural look, nature, of course, does not usually do things in absolutely perfect straight lines. So just running my brush down the grooves of the pumpkin, like so, using my larger of the two brushes I'll use today. Just running down all my grooves here, using this slightly darker orange. Start adding some definition to this pumpkin, because these come with zero definition at all. And at the top and the bottom of the pumpkin, I like to feather the extra paint left on my brush up and down like so, just again to give a little bit more dimension to my pumpkins. And I'll do this nice long one. They have these at Michael's, by the way. But now I'm mixing up next a lighter color, so I'm going to make a lighter orange here. If you just add white to the orange, it usually turns quite peachy, and you don't want your pumpkin to be peachy, so make sure to add yellow in as well so it doesn't come out too peach, unless you want a pastel peach pumpkin. Now I'm grabbing that fake sea sponge here so I can dab this on and sort of dry brush faux finish, I guess, my pumpkin here. This is exactly how I faux finish my wall in the other room too as well. I'm just going to coat that buddy with a nice dusting of the lighter orange. This is a very layered process, so it doesn't have to look great yet. Just get in there and start dabbing your pumpkin with your sponge, like so. I'm just going to tap around. I'm not trying to get full coverage here. You could do lighter or full coverage depending on what kind of effect you're looking for. Play around with different pumpkins. Like I said, the best time to grab these foam buddies, these carvable pumpkins, is actually at the end of the season. So midway through October, they start going on sale and disappearing. But of course, the first week of November, they're extra, usually 60% off over at the craft store. So it's a good time to stock up on pumpkins for the next year. These are expensive. They're an investment compared to real pumpkins, but of course they will last forever. So I try and grab a few each year so I can add to my collection and pumpkinify my entire house one day. But once my first sponge coat has dried, I'm going to go over my lines again, this time using the smaller brush so that my lines are a little bit thinner, and again a slightly darker orange color. So I've added a little bit more brown to my original darkest orange here. And again, you can use as little or as much contrast between your shades as you would like, depending on how subtle or bold of a look you want. The farther away their pumpkins are going to be, so if they're on stage or, they're going to be seen from 15, 20 feet away, you want to go ahead and up the contrast. If you're looking for something that's more of a, HD look, if you're going to be up close to the pumpkins, then, of course, you're going to have less contrast and more detail. But for me, I always figure you're going to be at least 6 feet away from a pumpkin, usually because they're on the ground or in my case, behind me on set, so I don't mind having them be a bit contrasty. But now that I've done that darker color again, I'm going to sponge again, but this time I'm going to use the palette of all the different paint colors I've been mixing on this plate and just dip all over. You can see I'm kind of mixing those colors, getting a little bit of each, and allowing them to mix as I pat this all over my tiny pumpkin here, and kind of mix the colors, keeping the band of like keeping the equator of the pumpkin, as it were, the lightest bit, and then focusing a little bit darker and smudgier colors on the top and the bottom of the pumpkin, just to again emphasize the volume and the three-dimensional quality of the pumpkin itself. Of course, light and shadow will do this naturally, but I'm just emphasizing the situation with a little bit of gradation of the paint as well. But I'm just tapping that into the various colors. If I need something a little bit lighter, I'll tap the sponge into the light paint, tap it back into the dark paint when I need to go darker. So I'm just really doing a more finessed version of the sponge painting this time. The first time I'm just getting a coat on there. This time I'm really thinking about where I'm placing the different shades of color or different gradations of color to try and create a nice pumpkin here. You could use glossy acrylic paint, by the way. I'm using matte paint today. I like my pumpkins to be more on the matte side, but of course natural pumpkins do have a bit of a waxy gloss to them, so you can always add a gloss top coat or a matte top coat afterwards, depending on what paint you have in your studio, you have in your craft collection as well. And as you can see, this is a bit of a messy activity, so put some newsprint down or something if you don't want to make a mess. This table for me, luckily, is quite washable, so I'm not too worried about it. I'm going to go ahead and touch up my stems a little bit here. I've allowed them to get messy so that the rusty color kind of makes more sense with the stems, because the stems are a bit gray to begin with, greenish gray. I'm just going to color those in with a little bit more brown, like so. You can have green stems, of course, if you want your pumpkins to look fresher, I suppose. And now I have a little like ramekin, a little sauce dish that I'm mixing water and black and brown paint into to create a really liquidy version of this paint, so I can flick it using this old toothbrush here. So I like to go ahead and spatter paint on these to look like little tiny dots and imperfections. And anywhere it drips too much or there's too big of a splatter, I just tap my finger over that area to make it look like a little bit of a diseased part of the gourd, you know? These have been lying on the ground to grow in the pumpkin patch, and so not every side of them should be perfect, and there could be little imperfections and smudgies. So I just, if this, you know, flicking of the paint on there gets too out of hand because it's watery, I just go ahead and tap out the larger dots to create sort of blemishes and bruises on the surface of the pumpkin. But I'm just using my thumb and my fingers against the toothbrush to flick tiny, tiny, tiny dots of paint on here. Again, I'm concentrating these more on the tops and the bottoms. I'm just doing a little bit on the center of the pumpkin. Again, it helps add to the almost airbrushed quality of having the darks and lights, adding more volume to this pumpkin. But I really think this gives it a much more finished and almost naturalistic effect. Of course, natural pumpkins, you could really look at a pumpkin for reference and get very detailed if you wanted to, but I'm trying to do, 3 pumpkins at once. It's a mass pumpkining, not a individual detailed pumpkin situation. And of course, I will carve these eventually as well. I'm going to tap out this large smudge here. As you can see, the paint being watery means it is actually quite transparent, so if you start tapping it out like this, it's not too dark of a spot. But I'm just concentrating all my flicked paint on here, and this dries pretty fast, luckily. Well, at least for me. I'm lucky that here in Colorado, the air is so dry here in this altitude, and whatever deserty environment we're supposedly in here, paint dries super quickly, so I can start thinking about carving here real fast. Now this little tool here, that looks a bit like a, curling iron of some kind with a knife on the end of it. It's basically an X-Acto knife that heats up. So this plugs in. Mine's a little feeble. It was a cheap one I think I grabbed actually on Amazon one time because I was like, shoot, I need a hot knife for this foam project I'm doing. I do work with foam quite a lot when it comes to set building and stuff because I find it's nice and durable. You can keep sets from year to year, keep pieces like this definitely for a long time as long as you keep them safe. They last, I should imagine, a very, very long time. Now I'm just drawing on some very basic jack-o'-lantern faces. I don't get super involved with my jack-o'-lantern faces. The only thing I like to do is put the eyes further apart than you should think they would be. I think that makes them look nice and silly and a little dumb, which is nice. And I'm just going to use this hot tool, again these are available at craft stores, carefully to cut away my shapes here. So I'm going to cut in straight, just to cut a hole, or in this case a little eye, and then I'm going to do my best to try and cut away the foam inside the shape. So I'm cutting out the outline of the shape first, and then I'll kind of cut puzzle pieces into it to be able to get in there and get these pieces out of here. I actually cut the largest door into my pumpkin to be able to put the light in it last, so you'll see that. And then once I have the basic shape in, I will go around and smooth off and do like a nicer cut. So I have like a rough cut first to get the main shape, and then I'll smooth off the edges with the hot knife a little bit more carefully once I have the rough shape in there. And you will see I actually kind of outline these. So I take this, kind of X-Acto knife shaped hot knife, and I cut away an angled portion, just the face of the pumpkin. So I don't make the hole into the pumpkin any larger, but I will kind of cut away some of the outside painted edge of the pumpkin. Here I am doing that now. You can see I'm just grabbing I'm using the tool at an angle, I suppose, to cut away some more of the outside flesh of the pumpkin, as it were. So I have a little bit more of the inside showing as a border around my face sections, eyes, mouths. It works really well for the teeth as well, because it makes them look like they have little white fangs, which is quite nice. But I'm just carving away carefully with the tool now. I kind of get rough to get the original shape in there, and then I refine the shape with a little more care here. Using this hot knife tool is much easier than trying to use just cold knives. Any other kind of pumpkin carving tool, using like regular pumpkin carving tools that you would use on an actual pumpkin, is kind of a nightmare on these, and the foam starts to fall apart on you and gets everywhere. This is something that you should probably do in a well-ventilated area, because you are melting the foam and there are some fumes associated with that, but I'm quite used to breathing in too much foam, so that's unfortunate. You could even wear like a mask or something like that, but probably just best to do this outside if you can get away with it. But once I have both my eyes cut out and then kind of detailed, carving away a little bit more of the orange pumpkin bits so we can see an outline for the eyes. I think this is nice because it makes them look quite cute when the lights are on. Of course, this is lost a little bit when the lights go off, but it's nice to have your pumpkins look good in the daylight and at nighttime when they're lit up. So I like having this bit of ivory outline around all my shapes that I cut out here. And I'm just angling the knife to be able to get that. So I go in at a 90-degree angle to cut out the shape, and then like a 45-degree angle as I carve off extra little bits so I can have that outline. And then here I'm using the edge of the hot knife tool to actually burn little blemishes into the surface of the pumpkin. So you can see that too. Sometimes I do it by accident, and then sometimes I just emphasize where I've accidentally burned my buddy. So here I'm just holding it against the edge of his mouth here, give him a couple of little blemishes. Looks a little bit more yellow when the foam starts to melt. And then to actually be able to put a candle in here, I'm going to cut a little door in the back of my pumpkin. Sometimes I cut the traditional, cut the stem off into a lid that I can put back on, but more and more I'm just using these little doors in the back, because then I can keep the top of my pumpkin pristine, as it were. So I'm cutting a rectangle in the back of this, and then I will cut a little thumb door handle out of this rectangle. So I'm cutting the rectangle out like so, little window in there. Again, this is just a 90-degree. And then I'm cutting a little thumb hook out of the door like so. So then I can just stick this back in here. It holds pretty well. Obviously if you're jostling your pumpkin too much, but if they're just gonna be sitting on your porch, it shouldn't, blow away or anything. Like so, you can pop a candle in there, and then I will carve the face on this little buddy. Once again, especially for these round eyes, I'm doing a small little round hole to start with, and then I'm carving the outside edge of that to add an outline. And you can kind of make the hole into the pumpkin quite small, and then the eyes as big as you want, just carving that 45-degree away into the lighter color of foam underneath to show. And I really think the key that I've discovered for my pumpkin jack-o'-lantern style is keeping these eyes rather far apart. Either the round-eyed or the triangle eyes here, I think, look cute a little bit farther apart. They probably look cute if you put them too close together as well. Putting them the perfect distance, I'm not about that life. I want them to look a little bit silly. And I am sorry about the table shaking so much. It's because I'm really working to get into this pumpkin, especially the smaller pumpkin. The walls of the foam were a little bit thick, so I had to really dig in there. My tool was not hot enough to do it smoothly, so I'm sorry about the shaky cam. But once again, for the back of this, once I have the face in, I'm going to carve out a little square in the back, big enough to put a fake tea light in here. Never use real candles in these, by the way, because as this melty tool that I'm using to carve these indicates, these are quite flammable, I assume, and will melt and catch fire, etc. So, don't recommend real candles. Fake candles all the way, like so. And these are my new jack-o'-lanterns to add on to my collection over on set this year when I start building some Halloween video backgrounds. I hope you enjoyed this little look at how I put my pumpkins together. I know this is rather a simple little DIY video today, but you know, go ahead and paint your pumpkins, I guess is the moral of the story. Thank you as always for watching today. I'll be back here with more sewing, vintage fashion, costuming, and occasional crafting real soon, so I'll see you then. Bye.